Speaking of psychological trauma, are we ready to talk about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
Wow. I don't know what to make of that transition. Psychological trauma for whom?
Me
The
and
the
all of the
electorate?
me and all of the progressives out there that have to watch this unfold be in front of us in real time
Wah, wah, wah. All right, so tell me how you feeling. What were your thoughts?
on Biden and Kamala Harris. Well, let's start with all of the contradictions. Maybe you can help me try to make sense of all of these things. It wasn't it Kamala Harris. Well, let's before we even started, everyone already knows that Biden chose he came through on his promise that he was going to pick a woman as a VP,
Hmm.
and now he came
Correct.
through and he chose Kamala Harris. And so when this happened, the first thing I thought about was, wasn't it Kamala Harris the one that accused Joe Biden of being racist or supporting racist policies, school busing, desegregating schools, and then the program for busing kids to other schools, and then
Yes.
and then also when the Brent Kavanaugh hearings were happening and the Me Too movement was at its peak, and she's the one that came the hardest on, or she's one of the ones that came the hardest on Kavanaugh about standing with the Me Too movement and about believing all women. And now she chooses to accept. I mean, she's not going to turn it down, right? Because we know she's a politician, but still, I mean, she's choosing to be the running mate of someone that she has formally accused of being racist and who has she's formally accused of sexual assault.
And also, I think the mishandling of the allegations against Justice Thomas, the Anita Hill incidents,
Okay,
because
yeah.
Biden was the chairman of the judiciary when that went down.
Okay. So if these are the saviors that are going to represent my community, the ones that I need to put all my hopes behind, that they're going to come through for our community and bring about positive change, not just like small piecemeal change, but really transform people's lives. Are these the candidates? Should I be excited about them?
Um, that's an interesting question, and obviously that's very individual. Well, I guess a couple of things. Once I wanna kind of break down the decision that was before Biden, and then the other piece I want to see if we can talk about what the Kamala pick means, both her and the dynamics that you described. So I think first of all, when you were thinking about sort of the handful of candidates, of female candidates that Biden said he was picking from, you had Elizabeth Warren, who I
Mm-hmm.
think would probably have been more of your cup of tea. Am I wrong?
Tulsi.
Oh, Tulsi. Oh man, you're still on her?
Of course, why not? Why is she disqualified? That right? I mean, that
Well,
tells
she never came up. I don't think she was even in the radar screen for the BP pick. At least not that I saw.
he could have put her in the radar. I mean, but
She could have been, yeah.
but yeah,
She
but
had a
yeah, but see,
military background.
but the fact that Tulsi was irrelevant doesn't start when Biden starts considering who he's going to pick for a VP. It starts with how they attacked her, even before the entire establishment attacked her. So for the entire Democratic Party to attack her and make her irrelevant and make her seem like an Assad apologist and attack. By the way, she's currently serving in the military, right? So for them to attack an active member, and then for all of a sudden to say, well, she wasn't in the in line to be picked to begin with, so that's irrelevant. We're not even going to consider that. Well, sure, okay, you can make that case, but it still doesn't dismiss the fact that it was the same party that made her irrelevant.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, she was not able to kind of break into the front runners. I think if her support would have been to an extent of where she would have been in the race, uh, in terms of funding, votes, and things like that. I know she represents Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
Which is politically, unfortunately, is not a state that brings. It's not a battleground state. All right. I mean, in California isn't, and that's one of the reasons I didn't think Biden was going to pick Harris, because I thought that he was going to go with the more progressive choice, which was going to be Elizabeth Warren, who had more experience, who I think would have definitely brought a little more enthusiasm to, or would have brought along more of her folks and also the folks that were enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think politically in terms of energizing the base, I thought that Elizabeth Warren was going to be it, but of course she's white. And I think when you look at the fact that Joe Biden's campaign was resurrected in the Carolinas, in large part by the African American vote, in large part by the African American woman vote, that I think he did owe to the community to pick an African American. And in this case, he went with Kamala Harris, who is also Indian or Asian Pacific Islander. No, she's yeah, she's
She's
considered
South
an
Indian.
Asian, Southeast Asian,
Yeah.
because her family's from India of Jamaican descent.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, she's very diverse, but it's interesting that the really focus is on on the black side of her or of her experience, in part because she grew up in Oakland and all those things. So,
But
so
she
I
also
think for
she. But I mean, is he thinking that choosing Kamala Harris is going to help him with the black vote because she has a horrible track record.
yes and no. I think she's tried to institute some changes, and I think she probably was not as progressive as most people wanted her to be at at either of those positions. But the fact of the matter is that she is a hell of a prosecutor, and I think she's shown that as she prosecuted, interrogated, or questioned the Supreme Court justices' picks and other witnesses that have come before her in the Senate. So I think that yes, she's probably not as progressive. She hasn't been as progressive as others are now able to do. And I think for me, it's also keeping in mind what the different dynamics were and what the context was at that time. Right, it was a very different time. So we're appreciating that we're putting our current perspective on something that happened, 15, 20 years ago, which we can still remember, but the dynamics were very different at that time.
It wasn't very long ago.
No, it wasn't. But yeah, but think about how many things, how much things have changed in terms of, I mean, just even this year, right? Like the type of social consciousness that has arisen because of the murder of George Floyd, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other instances, right?
Yeah,
There's been an awareness that's there and that has pushed the country to be a little more progressive, I think.
right. And
In some
look,
respects,
look,
there's been the opposite reaction too.
and look. Don't get me wrong. They're better than Trump and Pence. But what they did to Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard and Elizabeth Warren, the progressives of the party, first of all, those guys were pushed to the side, right? Because the establishment, the corporate interests that represent these Democrats are not going to give you a true progressive. So now we're stuck with these two. Okay, fine. Better than Trump, but it is what it is. That's how the system works. But even just looking at Kamala Harris, right? So you're telling me 15 years ago she was still convicting, was it pot offenders, people that were smoking pot, still getting convictions, going to jail, and that's what Tulsi Gabbard actually attacked her on in one of the debates. So this happened 15 years ago. It wasn't very long ago, but
Mhm.
it shows you that she is not someone that is going to go against whatever is considered acceptable at the time, meaning that she's not going to put herself in a position where she may lose favorability with whatever interests are around her to try to push forth an agenda that is progressive towards African Americans and Latinos, because she didn't fight against that. And then so now but again, look, this goes back to the problem that I always have with these politicians. So Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, I don't even consider them as in the sense of politicians with ideologies that want to represent certain people. They are representatives. These two are representatives of whoever is financing them, and they are going to vote and they are going to go along with whatever policies are favorable to their donors, which is what Kamala Harris, what she also did in California, where she failed to prosecute Steve Mnuchin, because his company, One Bank, there were, I think, the her office had come and found like thousands of violations that they had improperly foreclosed on people, and so she failed to prosecute him. Because why? Because there were some, um, she just will not go after someone that either supported her or someone in power, because that's not who she is. It's not in her interest based on who is backing her. So these aren't my representatives. These are representatives of wealth, of power, or corporate structure. And I suppose I'll take whatever they give me because I have no other choice. And but in the meantime, I will keep complaining about them and trying to support progressive candidates that really do
Yeah.
actually care more about the people and are not beholden to special interest money, corporate money. So in that sense, yeah, I'll take them. I'll take them because that there's no other choice. I'm not going to vote for them actually, right? California. Uh,
Ah!
well, it's California. California is going to go Democrat anyway. So might as well give my vote to a third party and help them build a sizable support so that maybe in a few years they're actual contenders.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, you're doing the right things, right, in terms of criticizing and supporting the candidates that are more aligned with your beliefs. I think for what the interesting thing too is that um, the Trump administration and the Trump campaign specifically is actually saying that this is the most progressive,
Right.
extreme right, mainstream left ticket that America has ever had. So it's interesting how you look at two candidates and people see them so differently, which is kind of the nature of politics and trying to get that work done to define the um, the opposition. And it's interesting
Yeah, they're
because
just using
with
scared.
Kamala Harris,
They're using scare tactics to
yeah,
scare the conservatives, the working class, into thinking that these are dangerous radical left progressives that are coming after your belongings and they want to redistribute it and give it to their communist supporters. And it's just scare
yeah,
tactics that they want to use.
yeah. And in some ways, but then you say, whoa, she was technically, she's considered a law enforcement officer as the DA and the Attorney General. So obviously she does have that background. She has the support of some within the law enforcement community. She understands those issues. And I guess for me, going back to something that you said, I think that you're right. Like it's hard. So I guess trying to, if I can articulate this, trying to understand how, because I think while she was an AG or district attorney in San Francisco and became an AG in California, I think she was able to do some things, and just her mere presence of an African American, Asian American in those offices, as a female, as a woman, in an area where it's usually so male dominated, she was breaking barriers. And I know that there's some things that she was trying to do at the time to change how um, enforcement what was being done, and finding different ways, different alternatives. Maybe she wasn't able to institute those to the extent that she would have wanted or that others would have wanted. But the point being is that she's trying to work within the system to change the system. And to your point, like it's true, like it doesn't matter who is in office, really. The United States is governed by a strong set of interests, and those are economic interests. Those are, the folks on the top of the pyramid who control the land, who control the businesses, um, who whose interests are really the ones that drive the big decisions that happen. So you're right, but I think
Like the prison system and the private prison industry in California.
yes,
Right, just to name one specific interest group that donates and has a lot of power when it comes to these politicians.
yeah, and in some ways that, and there's ways that you can go back and try to regulate that, right? And you got to think that a lot of these improvements have been made in the name of, efficiency, or getting the private sector, making it cheaper, better, getting getting the government out of the business of dot dot dot. And unfortunately, that's been used to then set up industries that become this these powerful interests that keep profiting from people. I know Hassan Minaj, one of the last things that he talked about was about, I believe it was TurboTax, right? And the birth of that whole industry
Mm-hmm.
that's profiting from something that should be free, which is, and they do provide a free service, but they don't advertise it.
Right.
And they've been able to make so many millions of dollars. So just that's just one example of how there are folks there trying to take advantage of others and take advantage of loopholes and of government regulations, and who wants to get to a level they're able to exert their lobbying, their contributions, and so much more to keep their business model going and
Right.
keep
And
opposition out.
yeah, and just so to name so there's the private prison industry, there's the healthcare industry, pharmaceutical industry, there's the industrial, military industrial complex. There is again, you said the financial sector. So these are the big dogs when it comes to influencing these politicians. And when I see tweets like this one, I get that Kamala Harris identifies as an African American, but does that by itself make her one? I don't give a shit. Right.
Oh,
But to be honest, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It helps to have an African American woman as a vice president because that's going to encourage a lot of young African American girls and Latinas. It's going to make them believe in themselves, and I think it's going to have a positive effect in that sense.
mm-hmm.
But when it comes to how she's going to side on policy, if I can go out on a limb here and guess what, assuming if they win, what the 4 years would be like, they would roll back some of the draconian policies or the stance that Trump has taken on
Mm-hmm.
immigration, the inhumane treatment, and so forth. They'll roll that back. They're not going to give you much more than what Obama gave us. Maybe they will be better with the deferred action program. Maybe
DACA.
that, yeah, with DACA, maybe that won't be in limbo as much as it's been under Trump. But we're not going to get anything really substantial there. When it comes to foreign intervention and trying to pretend like Assad in the Middle East is a dictator and pushing for war, these guys are going to be cheerleaders for that. When it comes to actually anything substantial with universal health care, you're not going to get that. Anything that really matters, that's going to affect people's lives, you're not going to get much out of these two candidates. And what you're already seeing is the discourse, at least today, from what I was hearing, from what I was reading, a lot of it is she black enough? Is she African American enough? That's just a distraction, at least to me. I know it's important to some people, but that's just a
Mm-hmm.
distraction to me from, they're not going to talk about anything substantial, really. And then they're going to talk about how bad Trump is. And then that's going to consume most of the debate. And you're probably going to get very little in terms of policy. And Trump's not going to give you policy. Trump's just going to try to scare everyone into thinking that these are raging liberals that want to take everything away from them, right? And so it's hard to get excited about them. The best I can do
Mm-hmm.
is, I know that the people are the ones that have the real power, and they'll only do as much as people are effective at making them do these things. Well, you said it yourself earlier. If he felt some pressure because of the recent protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, if he felt pressure because of that to choose Kamala Harris, then he's just doing what is politically expedient for him. He's just going to
Yeah.
follow. And so I hope that the pressure has to come from the people. And at this
Mm-hmm.
point, it's too late. They're already both, we have the presidential candidate, the vice presidential candidate. If they get into office, it's already too late by then, because it's really hard at that point for people to really organize and to get them to do things. It has to start right. We have to look ahead now to the 4 years from now, 8 years from now. These guys are already in office. Like I said earlier, Yeah, I'll take what they can give us.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think the type of work that you're talking about, which is currently underway, but it's happening within the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And I think to the credit of the Republicans, that's what that's been their plan all along. I mean, it's not only about who gets into office, but more importantly, who gets into office, who can appoint people to the judiciary, to all these other important little, not little, all these important functions within government who can advance your ideological agenda. So I think it sounds like we are, or that some are trying to build the type of foundation that would allow for more progressive candidates and more progressive policies to get um, implemented. And I think it just takes time, right? And I think you also cannot discount that, some people are just middle of the road, right? They have this, whether it's real or not, they have this fundamental understanding of what makes the American economy tick, what makes them be able to have the type of lifestyle that they're enjoying. Obviously, now it sounds weird we are saying all these things because in so many ways right now that American dream, quote unquote, is being challenged by what we're living during the pandemic, by what we're living around racial injustice issues and racial justice, about the economic realities that we're seeing and the enormous um, difference between the have and the have-nots and those who are really continuing to struggle because of what's happening. So I think that all of that is sort of being into question right now, and perhaps now is a time where people say, you know what, it is time for us to have universal health care. It's time for us to do XYZ because we've seen what has happened because of this pandemic, and it's better for us to have a strong health system so that our people are not unhealthy and unable to withstand the type of virus that we're dealing with now. So perhaps all of this is contributing to setting a more progressive path for the politicians in the years to come.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I'll continue to encourage people to try to stay away, get suckered into the whole debate about whether or not Kamala Harris is African American or not. Look, if it just to, I didn't even finish reading this. Is how ridiculous this is. Could Trump become African American the same way? If I identify with a bowl of cheese, does that make me a bowl of cheese? This
That's
is
so stupid.
pure stupidity from Dinesh D'Souza. D'Souza. Is he a politician? I haven't heard this name
I think
before.
he's an advisor. I think he was actually somebody who was, I think, found guilty and pardoned by the president. I think he's an advisor to the president.
Let me make it as simple as I possibly can for all these people that are saying whether or not she is African American or not. If she went, if she were to go into an all white neighborhood somewhere where there are conservatives or racists, and she would be attacked for looking black or being perceived as being black, meaning that she is subject to racism. She has experience and she experiences that. That means that she can identify as African American. All right,
Yeah.
and I don't even know
And
how this guy defines being. Does that make her one? Like, what makes an African American? It's
in this
if anything, it's the racists that define what African American is, because they refuse to look at black people as separately as being from different ethnic groups. They've never done that.
mhm.
They've never afforded them the ability that they do for like Europeans to say German American, or I'm part German, I'm part Italian, I'm part Dutch, whatever, right? I mean, white people get to have their ethnicities. Black people don't. Racists call them all African American, and they would have called Kamala Harris African American or black her whole life, and now they're questioning whether or not she is one. Well, dude, why don't you answer your own question? If you're a racist, would you have been racist towards her? And if yes, then that means that she has a common experience, a shared experience with every single other African American in this country.
It's true, and it's funny because the question itself, I mean, like he trying to define what an African American is. So he's is a racist premise to begin with, right? So like, what is the African American picture does he have in mind? What does he have to, talk a certain
Yeah,
way, look a
exactly.
certain way, be of a certain background? Is she not African American because she's educated or because she's this and that? So it's just like it's amazing, but
It's just political theater, and unfortunately, it's very
yeah.
effective because a lot of people get suckered into these debates, and then they end up talking about them for prolonged periods without really just focusing on the questions on the actual questions that matter, which is what's her voting record up until now, and how is she going to vote?
Yeah. Well, and
So
speaking of theater and creativity, I sent you the link for a post that Eva DuVernay did on some of the questions that people have about Kamala Harris. It's on Instagram. But basically, she talks about, you know, how people are so concerned about some things that she hasn't that Kamala hasn't done. But
New York Times, Harris, this right here.
yeah,
There's no debate anymore. There's no room for it in my book. We either make this happen or literally more of us perish. People are dying. Someone I love died. This is in response to the Trump's um, handling of the
but
coronavirus.
was in response to the nomination and some people feeling not feeling excited about Kamala and the nomination. So I
Uh,
think it's her response to, hey, like, yes, I know you're complaining about things that she didn't do, but also these are some things that she hasn't done, which is you know had an awful pandemic response, terrorizing protesters, separating immigrant families. So I
right.
think she's just making the point of you know what, like,
She's just saying, can we just get back to competency? Like, let's just get back to competency in the White House, and then we can worry about all these other issues afterwards. Because
in some ways, I guess you can say.
let me finish it. Okay, but this virus is real. If it hasn't visited your doorsteps, it will. Oh, but Kamala did this or she didn't do that. I hear you, and I know, and I don't care because what she didn't do is abandon citizens in a pandemic, rip babies from their mother's arms at the border, send federal troops to terrorize protesters, manufacture new ways to suppress black and brown votes, actively disrespect indigenous people. Yeah, she didn't manufacture new ways to suppress black and black votes, but she did send a lot of black people to prison because of, something as pot smoking. But anyway, I get what she's saying. Actively disrespect indigenous people and land, trafficking, white supremacist rhetoric, attempt. But this is the same tactic of, I know she's trying to portray Trump out to be this evil person and like somehow these are the saviors. Like, stop doing that characterization. Trump is terrible. These guys are not so terrible. They're going to get into office and they're just going to restore maybe some sense of competency, make things look pretty. And in reality, they're still going to have a lot of bad policies. So, but like I said before, at this point, yeah, it's a bit too late to be bitching too much about her because if you're a progressive and you're hoping to get a progressive elected, well, that didn't succeed this time around. It's
Mhm.
better to focus the attention on trying to again actively criticize these candidates, especially once they get into office, and then focus on the 4 years or later the next 4 years. At this point, to try to focus too much on just criticizing them, it's better to look ahead for the next 4 years and try to again start from scratch. Not start from scratch, but start again day one and try to push everyone collectively, the party collectively, towards a more progressive um, towards more progressive policy, so that in 4 years they'll feel enough pressure that they won't be able to do what they did this time around, which is essentially push Bernie and even someone like a Tulsi Gabbard to the side and give us more establishment candidates.
True that.
Any closing words before we wrap up?
I think it's been an interesting conversation. We'll see how this whole campaign, the remainder of the campaign. I know this week the virtual conventions will start, so it'll be interesting to see how this campaign plays out in a virtual sense. And I know that, well, we didn't get a chance to talk to. I think there's concerns about the support for the U.S. Postal Service,
Yeah.
which I think we something that I think as Americans, Americans take for granted, but as somebody who grew up in a place outside of America, realizing how like what an amazing thing it is to be able to put something in a little blue box that gets to its destination across the country, across the world, um, relatively cheaply and reliably. And now that's something that it's it's of a concern, which is kind of indicative of the times we are. But in any case, thank you for joining us for this wide-ranging conversation. I hope you can continue to connect with us, listen to us. We have our YouTube channel, we have our Instagram, we have our Twitter. That here's our Instagram, Brown Perspective, with the hustle, the Twitter, and we promise to start becoming a little more active in that space.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I appreciate. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experience on the topics that we discussed today.
Yeah, definitely. And just one thing before I close, also, I should have read the whole thing earlier because I do agree with this, which is vote them in and let's hold them accountable, which is really, I suppose, what I'm saying as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if she says, and keep fighting for your progressive cause. That's the only other part that I will throw in there. So, yeah.
Cool.
Bueno, nos
We can
vemos.
leave it in agreement, baby. Agreement is a good place to be.
Yeah, yeah, nos vemos.
Ciao.